Hey all, it's very good to see you. I've been reading a couple of interesting news articles, primarily from The Verge, on some developing circumstances between Yuzu, a very popular Nintendo Switch emulator, and Nintendo themselves. And so, upon kind of consuming some of that content, I wanted to provide a little bit of my perspective and commentary on the situation at large, as well, just to give some, perspective myself. So historically, and this happened, a handful of maybe months back or maybe a year or so, there was a similarly popular emulator called Skyline, and Skyline actually was hit with a DMCA notice from Nintendo because of their lock-picking tool software that they had developed. And basically, this software was designed to help extract keys from owned Nintendo Switch games so that people playing the games could access them via emulator. And so there has been a lot of historical activity on Nintendo doing this kind of stuff. And last week, Nintendo sued the development team Tropic Haze, who was building this Switch emulator, Yuzu, and sued them on the grounds of kind of invoking and encouraging piracy. So basically, DMCA infringement is what it came down to. And they asked for a couple things. They said, well, the first thing we're asking for is that Yuzu stops all activity. And Nintendo also demanded from the courts take away domains, URLs, chat rooms, socials, anything Yuzu is associated with, and also to have the right to seize hard drives, servers, etc., to eliminate the propagation of the spread of Yuzu software. And essentially where Nintendo's complaint lies on is the nuance, and that what is required for Yuzu software to operate and how it operates. So Yuzu required that users bring their own BIOS, so they get a dump of their BIOS and use it in the software, and then of course have their own keys, something similar to what Skyline was focused on doing. But of course, a lot of these items you can get online: BIOS, keys, downloaded versions of images, etc. And this is a current modern console on top of that. And so, of course, there's going to be a lot of focus on the product because of the fact that what Tropic Haze is developing is an emulator for a modern gaming console that hasn't had a support drop, hasn't been put in the back catalog, so on and so forth, which is why I think specifically we've seen Nintendo going after Switch-related emulators as opposed to something like Dolphin, which is mostly GameCube and Wii and so on. And also there was this added factor of the business purpose that Yuzu and Tropic Haze were working on, which was you kind of have these two bifurcated, or maybe a blend of two paths you see with these businesses. One of them is not a business at all. It's really a focus on archiving and preserving video games that are, again, dropped by their publishers, dropped by their console studios, and unsupported. Games where if people didn't proactively take the time to save and preserve these items, would be lost and unplayable. And there is a lot of that already out there. And so I really applaud folks who take their time to develop these emulators and create an opportunity for people to enjoy these games that would, in fact, otherwise be lost without these people. So, but there's a second kind of bifurcating path, or diverging path, which is, as a business, you are using the emulator to fund and drive revenues of some kind. And this is where I think was particularly aggravating for Nintendo, because Yuzu had a really popular Patreon in which they were collecting money to further fuel their efforts to create and update the emulator and so on. So when you kind of bring this factor into the whole circumstance, I think this is where the basis for the lawsuit and Nintendo's motivations to do it really kind of come into play. And so that since Tropic Haze was attempting to create legitimate business through use of another company's IP, that's where it is. And I'm not defending Nintendo from the lens of they have always been very litigious and very aggressive on enforcing their IP, and I think they do it well, far and above what the typical company ever should, especially in a creative industry where the whole point of sharing ideas is to do exactly that, share them, right? So there were a couple outcomes of this actually developing just this week. Tropic Haze is going to pay Nintendo $2.4 million according to a settlement not yet agreed to by a judge. And they also are going to do and meet the demands that Nintendo asks, which is to turn over hard drives, turn over the domain for Yuzu, and so on and so forth. But here's a couple of issues that I foresee, right? Many people already have the code for Yuzu, and if I understand kind of the play-by-play, a lot of what happened with Skyline, okay, Skyline was taken down for a DMCA notice, but a lot of what was the foundation for Skyline was built and used in Yuzu, and so I am assuming what we'll see is with Yuzu gone, a new emulator rise up and become just as popular, and maybe just change the foundational lens by what business they operate, right? Maybe don't do the Patreon thing, for example. So I foresee a number of copycats being spawned from it. I do also think that this move is, in general, kind of bad PR for Nintendo because of the fact that you will not eliminate this. I mean, I remember, I'm almost 30 now, and I remember being a little kid, 5 or 6, and my dad giving me a CD saying, hey, my buddy burned this for me. It's a bunch of computer games. Go and play them. And I played all these computer games, and it was quite the collection, like 800 computer games. And later, as I got older and was introduced to some of these titles through other means, I realized a lot of the games I was playing were Super Nintendo console games I just hadn't heard of or wasn't familiar with. And that was 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, that emulation was already a thing and already developed. And so when you consider that in the lens of this whole story, I think it's just really bad PR for Nintendo to be on such a bender over these people who are creating emulation, because realistically, and I think this has been proven in other means, music, movies, etc., the more accessible and the easier it is for people to get those items, the more likely people are to just pay in a convenient way for them. A big reason why Nintendo emulation is so popular is Nintendo makes it impossible to engage with their gaming ecosystem. If you want to go back and buy a frickin' GameCube and 2 games, even the cheapest games, you'll spend like $400 because Nintendo's made it impossible to access some of these games on newer consoles. They've made it impossible to get product at a reasonable price because either they don't produce enough or they create an environment in which they fix their prices to the launch price, for instance, and they never eliminate it and drop it. And I think it's a bad business model from the lens of, if you want to capture consumers that are going to be incentivized to go out and pirate and download illegally these games and play them, which is the basis for Nintendo's lawsuit. If you really want to make the money, then engage those consumers in a reasonable way that meets their ask, which is, I can't afford this console, I can't afford these games, and so on. I mean, I think that's a lot of why people are out here downloading emulators and so on. I can't speak for somebody who gets a Steam Deck and then they're out there playing Yuzu, which I know has also been a thing. Yeah, I mean, that's just my perspective, and I think it's pretty obvious from my channel. I play a lot of PlayStation games. In the lens of what I was just describing, I feel like of the 3 kind of big studios with consoles and so on, PlayStation has been the most accessible and friendly to their consumers and their ability to play games and so on. I mean, Steam is the ultimate example, I would describe, but among home console gaming, I think PlayStation does that as well among the 3 as they could. And so, I think that's a good thing. And I wish Nintendo would look at that model and think a little more about it, because I still have not bought a Switch to this day, because when it launched at $300, and then it was like 400, 500 on scalping websites and things because they were sold out. I said, well, that's a little too pricey and not really in my budget range. And then when it came down to 250, it was, you know, a couple years old, and the PS5 was going to come out. And now it's, how long has the Nintendo Switch been out? It's been years, and it's still impossible to buy one for less than $300. And when a console is of that age, you know, why am I going to go out and buy it for $300 when I have a whole fantastic library of PS5 or 4 games that I've built? Or, you know, similarly for Xbox Series X and S users are probably in the same boat. So, yeah, just not a great business model in my opinion, to fix your prices, to sue anybody who says otherwise or does otherwise. But it seems like Nintendo's going to get their way. And the biggest concerning issue for me is that Nintendo is still pushing for the judge to make a decision and basically create a precedent on the idea that, you know, Yuzu's activity did violate a DMCA, and so that they can more easily enforce these claims in the future against other, you know, emulating studios or softwares and so on. You can't stop a wave. And emulation is something that's here, and it's going to be here to stay. And just, again, similar to other forms of piracy and the activity around them, make it accessible, make it easy for people to engage with, and that's how you drive better business. And you do it in a way that consumers will be happy with the company and so on. Anyway, kind of a bummer what's happening with the whole Yuzu situation. Would love to also hear your perspectives on it. I really appreciate you watching the video, and like the video if you like the video. Would love to hear your thoughts, and please subscribe. All right, I'll see you all next time.